So, hello, Peyton, Brooklyn, Madison, and whoever else may join us or watch this recorded. It's our last Zoom. This is it. We're wrapping things up. And first, let me go to our Google Classroom. Okay, so for our Google Classroom, okay, what I did here is the test is here. I put the link in there now. It went up last night. And it's just 12 and 13. So you can use the 12 and 13 notes, and it's more like an assignment in that sense. And I'm going to literally do a review to help me even make it a little easier for you because I haven't talked that much about the 12 and 13 notes directly. I did a little bit in some of the Zoom sessions, but I figured, hey, for those that are willing to watch this, I'll give them a big help. Okay. So we're going to do that in just a moment. Make sure you get everything else turned in. Officially, everything is due Friday at midnight, tomorrow at midnight. But off the record, I'm not going to get to grade any of this probably till Sunday. So if you don't get something in by Friday midnight, do your best to do that. But if something you get busy and you got a bunch of stuff going on, you want to turn in something Saturday, not a problem. I may do some grading Saturday, but if I'm going to be doing the most of it on Sunday, because I need to first get ready for my next semester classes. Then I'll wrap this up. For those of you doing well, great. Go for better if you can. If you're in the B range, go for the A range. If you're in the C range, go for the B range. If anyone's watching this, probably recorded because usually not the people who come in person, that is not passing. First, if you're close, if you're like in the 50s, get in whatever you can get in to get you over 60. Do that. There are two or three people that I can think of that were not passing, but I know they had some extenuating circumstances like family with big health issues and some other things going on. So if you're one of those people that are in that situation that hear this, contact me immediately. We can talk about maybe working something out for those that want to pass. If you don't want to pass, don't contact me. But if you want to pass, contact me today or tomorrow and we can talk if you're, put something together there for you. But if I don't hear from you, and especially if you're not anywhere near passing, I assume you want to flunk and you will flunk. That's simple. Okay, it's not my choice, it's yours. But if there are extenuating circumstances or problems or issues or you're struggling or trying to get up to there, contact me. Okay, I'm going to leave this screen up because obviously I'm not going to put this test screen up on here, but I have the test screen here open to me. So I'm going to go through these, and this may make it a lot easier for you. And like I said, I'm not wasting anybody's time. If I'm talking about it, it's on the test. I'm looking at the test while I do this. So I'm not going over all the notes. If I don't mention a note, it's not on the test, probably. Okay. But you have them to look at anyway. First of all, when you have, this is gonna be kind of random because that's how the questions come up. When you talk about economics, one of the things that's in the notes is there's different levels of economics for societies. Okay, and level, um, the most basic level is pre-industrial societies. That's in societies that are, you know, um, they got they most of their activity is by animals or human labor. Okay, so make sure you're aware of that pre-industrial. Now, once they get industrialized, then that's another big step. The U.S. and Europe and Japan and other countries started industrializing in the 1800s, and that carried into the 1900s. Since about the 1980s, we are considered a post industrial society. What does that mean? That means that even though industry still exists and that's important, it's become less and less of important of a part of the economy. Most people now work in services. Okay. Um, Part of that's technology. We don't need as many people working in those fields. Okay. Um, in economics, there's something called factors of production. And again, if I'm talking about it, it's right from the test. So, factors of production include things like goods and services, or resources to make goods, to provide goods and services. So, you might need, wheat to make bread. You need, you know, cows to make burgers. You need oil to make gasoline. So that's the resources needed to produce goods and services. Okay, and that's factors of production. A famous book, and this would be a book that is early book. The word capitalism didn't really come in that much into effect till the 1800s, and it was about the idea that people would invest capital, money usually, into a business like a factory to make money. Now, capital includes human labor also. So when you provide labor, that's capital. If you provide money, that's also capital. Okay, so that's what's going into the business. And then, the goal then, of course, is to make a profit. One of the early books that's very influential in the world of free trade or capitalist economics is called Wealth of Nations, and it's by a guy named Adam Smith. It came out in the 1700s, but it's still very influential. It basically talks about how nations can create wealth, and if they have more free trade, everyone benefits from that, and people, do better. I'm not going to go into any more detail than that, but know Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations. Um, Another famous book that was about capitalism, in favor of capitalism, and the good things about capitalism, and capitalism being a way to build up your economy better and people get more, become better off, was a book called Capitalism and Freedom by a guy named Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman is an American economist, who wrote books and was a professor and all that. And he promoted free trade capitalism, and all the reasons why he thought that would be better for society. So his famous book is Capitalism and Freedom, Milton Friedman. Okay. Economic models, like different ways of doing things. There's three big ones that we cover. And these are, when I mention these are broad definitions. One is capitalism that we talked about, the idea of having free trade and businesses and private property and making profits. That's all capitalism. Communism is where basically the government owns and runs just about all the means of production. So if you go work in a factory, it's owned by the government, and the government decides what to make and how to sell it, and what the price should be, and profits aren't necessarily have anything to do with it. So that's communism theoretically. Socialism, now, of course, the word socialism can mean a lot of different things. It could mean Sweden, it could mean Cuba. Okay. And the Cuban socialism would be basically communism. Okay. Or what we used to have in the Soviet Union. The Swedish, Danish, Norwegian socialism is basically capitalism and democracy blended with a lot of government programs. So that version of socialism, kind of like the Bernie Sanders version of democratic socialism, is the idea that your heart of your economy is still capitalist, and you have, free democracy, so forth. It's not forced on anybody, but the democratic socialist or socialism countries, in that sense, they just simply have a whole lot of government services. They usually have high taxes to pay for it, and then they might have free or really cheap college and university. They have universal health care for everybody. They have, all kinds of other benefits, child care, um, welfare benefits for people who are disabled and that. Now you might say, Mr. Rio, we have some of that here. We have Social Security, we have Medicare, we have Medicaid, we have, quite a few programs out there from the government to help people and do things like that. Quite frankly, that's a form of democratic socialism. So there's no such thing as a purely capitalist economy. So all economies got some blends of things. And look at not modern day China. Officially, they're the Communist Party. Unofficially, they became capitalist about 40 years ago. to some extent. So, it's a mixed up, muddled up world out there in economics. But in theoretical communism, the government runs everything. Capitalism's all free enterprise. Socialism is some variation in between. Okay. Something like democracy is not an economic model. Democracy itself is not capitalism, socialism, or communism. It's just, freedom and political parties and voting. It's not an economic system. So people in a democracy can have different views. Okay. When a few large companies control an entire industry, that's called an oligopoly. Right now, some people are looking at some of the tech companies. Has been a lot in the news lately. Like, does Google have too much power because 95% of searches are on Google, or Google has YouTube, which is most web video, or Google has, whatever else, Android, which is out there and a lot of stuff. Apple, for some areas, especially their own stuff, or what they allow in the App Store. Do they allow competitors to have apps in the App Store? That's been in the news. Amazon taking over more and more of retail sales. Okay, is that becoming too big and too powerful? So the idea of an oligopoly is if you get a small number of very big players in an industry, it could be banks, it could be whatever, that's not necessarily a good thing. So a lot of times we have what's called antitrust, where they try to, this is a legal thing, trust, and they try to break up big companies in some cases, or force them to sell off parts of their businesses so they get more competition and not too few companies dominating everything. So that's an oligopoly, when only a few industries control a market. The biggest economy in the world is still the United States. China's getting close. They may surpass us in the coming years. China also has like 4 or 5 times as many people as we have. But we still, when they put it all the output of goods and services and everything in the economy, the U.S. is still the number one. But China is catching up quickly and will probably surpass us, which is not all bad. I mean, they're just way huge, so it's kind of expected that would happen, but who knows? Um, the system of roles and norms that governs the distribution and exercise of power. Now, that's a fancy word, roles and norms and distribution of power. That's a political institution. Okay, it comes right out of your notes. So, political institutions in the U.S., we have the executive branch, or the presidency. Have been big in the news lately. You've been watching that. We have the Senate. We have the Congress, the U.S. House of Representatives. Actually, the word Congress is used for both, excuse me, the House and the Senate, but they're all political institutions. Okay. And at the state level, we have similar ones. We have the governor instead of a president. We have the state Senate. We have the state House of Representatives. At the local level, we have mayors and city councils and school boards and township boards and all these type of things. So those are political institutions, and they have roles, they have norms, they have ways that they govern, and they basically distribute and exercise power. So if you don't get involved in politics and you don't vote and you don't follow it, then you don't have really any say in what they decide to do. And just to use one example on a local level, because I talked to a friend of mine that lives in Emmett Township. A few years ago, it wasn't the world's biggest secret that a lot of the roads in Emmett Township were terrible. Okay. So part of the problem is most of the roads in Emmett Township are under the county. Okay. There's a couple roads that are run by the state, like Michigan Avenue, but most of the roads are under the county, and the county is big. It's not just Emmett Township, but it's the whole county. And the county doesn't have a lot of road budget. That's why when you drive around country roads, there used to be a big road budgets, but I talked about the economy's been changing a lot in the last 40 years. So what happened was the state of Michigan used to give a lot of what they call revenue sharing to counties, because counties don't always bring in a lot of revenue. And then they would use that money for roads. But then at the state level, this goes back to power. People got elected after getting big donations from very rich people. And those very rich people wanted some very big tax cuts. And to cut the state budget to pay for those tax cuts, they quit giving as much money to colleges and to counties and to all these other groups. Well, that leads to higher tuition in college. That leads to worse roads at the county level and things like that. So when you hear about tax cuts, that's not always a good thing if you're on the other end that's getting worse roads and worse, less police and more expensive college and stuff. So what Emmett Township did is, because they're kind of their own township within the county, they passed their own millage. So in other words, they raised taxes on the people of Emmett Township, and that money 100% goes to roads in Emmett Township. So a lot of the people said, I don't mind paying some more taxes if it's going to benefit my community. So that's how a lot of people are. They're like, I don't mind the taxes so much if I see some benefit, especially if I get some benefit. So that's a kind of example of stuff that goes on, but that's a political institution. Okay. Education is about transmitting knowledge, learning about math, science, writing, reading, all that kind of stuff. Transmitting values. We do our Pledge of Allegiance in the morning. We try to promote various types of values: honesty, hard work, against prejudice, cooperation, whatever the values may be. We try to promote American values, you can call them, good values, you can call them, and also patterns of behavior. Education is also about patterns of behavior. So and that can vary depending what class you're in, or if you're on a sports team, or if you're in the marching band, or if you're in whatever you're involved in here at school. All the above education does: values, knowledge, behavior. Let's see here. Yeah, there's a formal definition about education involving schooling is formal education with instruction by specially trained teachers. And yes, we have all kinds of teacher training and requirements. I don't know if you guys know, but I have to be licensed. I had to meet criteria to get my teaching certificate. It's actually a certificate, they call it. And I have to renew that certificate. So I have to do various things, take classes, and get training and stuff to renew it every 5 years. So there's a lot of requirements on teachers, specialized knowledge relating to education. Now, if you remember the term functionalist, okay, functionalist going way back to beginning of this semester in sociology, they're always looking at everything from the purpose of function. Okay, let's take a family. A functionalist would look at what's the function of the mother, what's the function of the father, what's the function of the kids, what's, things like that. If they're going to look at economics, they'll say, what's the function of the company? What's the function of the employee? What's the function of the person that owns the company? So that's how functionalists look at everything. So the functionalists, when they look at education, they would say one function is teaching knowledge and skills. Another one is transmission of culture. And another one is social integration, bringing the community together, bringing people together, meeting other people. So the functionalist would say that for all the above. So they would say, now you might say, is that for social control too? Hint, hint. And the answer is no. The functionalist does not see education as about social control. They see it as about transmitting knowledge, culture, and social integration, but not social control. Hint, hint. Okay. Which brings us to social integration. What is it? Social integration is promoting a national identity, which I'll get back to in just a second. And it fosters social integration by teaching core values. Now, some of our core values might be things like about our democracy. We believe in freedom. We believe in, let's say we say, in generally speaking, with obviously some exceptions of extreme examples, we believe in freedom of speech. Okay. Extreme examples would be like you can't threaten people or allow or shout, fire in a theater when there's no fire or something like that. But as far as, sharing different opinions and viewpoints, a lot of people say, I've heard the saying, I may disagree with what you say and think, but I'll fight for your right to say it. That's kind of an American value. So we have things like that. Now, back to the national identity about being an American. One thing that really um, made me think about this was I used to take students to Washington, D.C. on a program called Close Up. And students would come from all over the country, and we'd get to meet all kinds of students and teachers from other parts of the country. And then we'd spend a week together learning about government and history and everything, Washington, D.C., visiting monuments and all that. And that brought us together as Americans. We all shared that. We're all Americans. We all shared it. We're proud of it. We're learning about it. It was awesome. I mean, I wish I could bring everybody there. Well, when I would meet these Americans, my fellow Americans, you wouldn't believe the variety of people you meet. Start with the obvious. People from Texas are a little different than us, and they have a little different accent, maybe a little different way of doing things, maybe a little slower in the South, a little more laid back, a little more easygoing. People from New York or Chicago or Boston, are going to be a little more big city orientated and have a little different accents and a little different ways of doing things and thinking. But I'll use a couple of the more examples of people I don't get to meet very often. One was a bunch of people came every year from Alaska. So you might say, what kind of people came from Alaska? There were three types of people I met from Alaska. Native Alaskans, okay, that came from various native backgrounds. Now, using the word Eskimo is not accurate. They don't call them Eskimos. They have various types of native or original type people there. They got different groups. There's not just one. So it was interesting meeting them and learning about them. They're Americans, but they also have their other subculture. I met Russians from Alaska. So you might say, what's the deal, Mr. Rio? How are Russians in Alaska? A long, long time ago, these communities moved from Russia to Alaska. They were very religious. It's called Old Orthodox. They're a little bit like Amish, okay, but not as isolated. And they wear traditional clothing, and they are ethnically Russian, from their background, but they're American now. They learn English and Russian growing up, so they could speak Russian. And this bunch of them live in some part of Alaska, and they would come every year. They'd send some students, so it was interesting. And then I met the people who live in Alaska who are neither native nor the Russian group, so they would be more probably like people in Michigan to some extent. They enjoy the outdoors and things like that. I also met Puerto Ricans, and a lot of people don't know that these are from Puerto Rico. And a lot of people don't know that everybody in Puerto Rico is a United States citizen. I met people from Hawaii, from the U.S. Virgin Islands. You may not realize those are American citizens in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And of course, people from all over California and Florida and Nebraska and you name it. So we're all Americans, though we have all these differences and stuff. Okay, so social integration is about that. Okay, the conflict perspective people, they're the ones that always look at the different conflicts of groups in society. It could be the rich versus the poor. It could be the different ethnic groups. It could be whatever, wherever there's a conflict, different religious groups, majority and minority groups, wherever there might be a conflict, men and women. Okay. So, conflict perspective on education includes things like social control. And their view would be, is there social control going on? Is there a conflict there? It could be tracking, and tracking is something in education where, and some people think this is a good idea, and some think it's a terrible idea. And that's where they track students by ability. Now, most schools do that at least a little bit because not everybody's in the same math class at the same time or whatever. But there's debates to what extent tracking is good or bad. The good thing about tracking would be people can be at their own level, so you're not thrown into something that's maybe too hard or too easy. The downside to tracking, and this has been especially studied with things like minority groups, is some groups, either because of poverty or their ethnic background or whatever, they feel sometimes get unfairly tracked into maybe lower groups than they should be in. So there's been some criticism of that. And they also look at conflict perspective in education looks at education, socioeconomic status. So that would be a lot of like, poorer schools don't have as much resources and aren't as good as schools than schools that have wealthier students. And they would look at stuff like that. So they're always looking at where there might be some conflicts going on. Okay. I'm zipping through these here. Uh, Anything that's not anything considered to be supernatural, part of the supernatural world that inspires awe, respect, and reverence is called sacred. So when you get into religion, things that are sacred are things that, are get great respect, great awe, and maybe part of the supernatural world. So that could be religious figures, religious symbols, religious, different things. So that's a big part of religion, the sacred. A function of religion. Now, from a purely sociological point of view here, we're not looking at from the religion itself, but from a sociological point of view, someone from the outside looking at why might, what's some functions of religion. And one of the functions of religion, actually, I'll give you three of them. One is social cohesion, bringing people together socially. So I think most people would agree that religious groups tend to do that, bring people together socially. To some extent, social control. Religions do, in fact, engage in social control, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. People think social control is a bad thing. It could be good or bad, depending on what they're trying to control. So if they're trying to get people to behave well and be good citizens and work hard and be honest, then I think most people would say that's a good thing, trying to get people to do good stuff. It could be negative. If you think of like a cult where they tell people like stay away from your families and don't believe anything is here except what we tell you and give us all your money, or something like that, then obviously that could be a bad thing. And also, it's no secret religions provide a function of religion is to provide emotional support. So, emotional support, social cohesion, social control, they're all functions of religion. Okay, back to economics a little bit. The primary economic sector is the lowest one that basically is just about getting raw materials from the environment. You go to the poorest place on the planet where there's no industry or anything like that, and they're just digging for food or digging for coal or whatever. That's about all they can do. It's just getting stuff from the ground. Now, when you get to that particular question here, there's like a fifth choice that makes no sense whatsoever. It's just some kind of typo or an extra thing got left in there. So if you see anything like that, just ignore it. It's definitely not the right answer. Okay. Back to post-industrial societies, the ones where like us, where yeah, we do have industry, but we move beyond that. We have more services in that. They focus on what's called the tertiary sector, which right now I'll just leave it at that. That would be a focus for the post-industrial societies. Okay. And again, you can use your notes on all these. The law of demand is that demand will increase as prices decrease. If you get in economics, it's a big thing they talk about supply and demand. Demand increases when prices go down. So people buy more of something when it gets cheaper. Think of like televisions. When the first big high def TVs came out, they were like thousands and thousands of dollars. And I knew hardly anybody that ever bought one. It took some years, but eventually prices got lower and lower and lower and lower. Now they're so darn cheap. You can go out and get a great big beautiful TV for, $300. And, it used to be for the same type of TV it would cost you thousands. So as the price dropped, people bought way more of those TVs. Okay. Now most people have a high def TV. Capitalism. The factors of production are owned by individuals. It's not about the government, but people own their own. They own their own businesses. They own their own things that go into that. And most of the activity is regulated by profit and competition. So to motivate people, like if there's something you can be profitable in, I'll use the example of farmers. I talk to farmers sometime and they'll tell me something like, okay, this year, say China is going to be buying a lot more soybeans. So the demand's going to go up. So the prices start going up. So then maybe a farmer that hasn't grown soybeans for a while decides, you know what, I'm going to switch from, say, corn. Maybe that's not making as much money. And now I'm going to focus on soybeans where I can make more money. Okay. So, but at the same time, there's competition. So, in other words, other farmers will do the same thing. They'll say, well, I'm also going to make more soybeans. And that could bring in more competition, which can bring the price down. So they view the market as being capitalism as regulating, prices and all that stuff, who's making stuff based on the profit and competition. What's not true about capitalism is the government owning the means of production. So that would definitely be a wrong one. There was a program thing called No Child Left Behind involving education. And No Child Left Behind put an emphasis on early reading and standardized test scores. It's been around now about 20 years. So if you hear a lot about a lot of reading programs, and that's where the federal government will give schools money for stuff like that, Title One and all that. Big emphasis on reading and big emphasis on standardized test scores. So all those standardized tests you guys are required to take, a lot of that's connected to No Child Left Behind. Okay. Just to use a few common sense things, is educational opportunities distributed equally? The answer should be no. We all know some places get more opportunities and better schools than others. Do a lot of Americans oppose bilingual education? That is true. A lot of Americans do oppose bilingual education. I think a lot of it, quite frankly, is a misunderstanding of what is bilingual education. I've talked to a number of people in Michigan who teach for bilingual education. Now, most of the stereotype is that it's all Spanish. It's not. One of my friends teaches in suburban in Detroit in Dearborn, and she teaches bilingual classes in Arabic and English because she's in a school that's about 95% Arabic, okay, including a lot of recent immigrants from the Middle East. So, and what they all tell me, whether they're doing a Spanish language program or in her case, an Arabic language program in Michigan, the goal is not to teach American kids the other language. The goal is to take kids who already speak that other language, whether it be Spanish or Arabic or whatever, depending on where you go, and to help them transition to learning English. So that's one of the misnomers of bilingual education. They think, oh, it's about promoting other languages. Now, don't get me wrong, we do teach languages and we do have programs where people want to be in a program so they can learn more Spanish or Chinese or whatever it may be. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about bilingual education is not to promote the other language unless people are trying to learn that language. The idea is to take people who already speak these other languages and get them to learn English. Okay. So I think a lot of people think it's the opposite and they don't understand. I think if they did understand that it was about getting people who don't speak English to speak English, I think they'd be much more supportive. Okay. And of course, schools do teach cultural values. You guys should know that. Transmission of culture. You get culture, three big places you get your culture from. You get your culture from your families, whatever your family culture is. You're learning at home, you're engaging in cultural activities. If you're Jewish, you might be celebrating Hanukkah. If you're Christian, you're celebrating Christmas. If you're Hindu, you're celebrating Diwali. There's things like that you're going to get from your families. And it's not just about religion, it can be about lots of things. And of course, religion. That's the next one I was just going to mention. That transmit a lot of culture. So a lot of people get a big part of their culture from religion and schools. So basically, families, religion, schools are the three big ones for transmitting culture. Okay, one of the things in there they talked about was what was called zero tolerance policies. Now, they could be things like if a student brought a gun to school, they're kicked out. No ifs, ands, or buts, no tolerance. You're kicked out for the rest of the year, maybe forever from that school. Another one is if students engage in violence, they get in a fight or do something like violent at school, that they can get kicked out or removed or arrested or whatever, no tolerance. And another one would be if they're caught with drugs or alcohol at school and they could get zero tolerance. Now, on one level, this may sound like, wow, that's a great policy because, we don't want people bringing guns or engaging in violence or doing drugs at school. So they often will say, yep, I support that. But then it gets a little more complicated. Use one example. In a lot of rural schools, it's not uncommon that maybe the night before a kid went hunting with their dad and they left their shotgun in the trunk of the car. Then they get to school and they're going to get some stuff they need for class and they're out in the parking lot. They open their trunk and somebody sees the shotgun in there, reports it to the school. The school investigates. The kid says, "Yep, I went hunting last night. I got the shotgun in the trunk of my car." And the school says, "Sorry, we have no choice. We have to kick you out for the rest of the year and call the police." Now that's where it starts getting to be like, is that really what zero tolerance was about? It doesn't consider any other factors whatsoever. Not saying that kid might not get some punishment. Some people might say he shouldn't have done it. He should get maybe suspended for a few days and given a warning, but kicking him out for the rest of the year and calling the police, throwing him in jail, maybe, that's where the debate comes in. Same with drugs. There's a huge difference between someone who's a big time drug dealer and someone that, not to justify it, but they might have had something with them that a lot of people would say, well, maybe they shouldn't be kicked out the rest of the year. Maybe we should get them some help. Or in the case of violence, violence varies widely. The kid try to murder someone or they just get in a little shoving match in the hallway. And there can be big differences of what goes on or how it started or the circumstances. So that's a few of the things about the zero policy. Okay. I know I'm going over here a little bit, but I want to get through this for everybody. Which is not true about religions in the U.S. What's not true is if someone were to say we're not religiously diverse, because the truth is we are very religiously diverse. Okay, I think everybody knows that. We have all kinds of religious groups here. Even within Christianity, there's countless different groups, not to mention other religions. And one of the guys out there that basically supported capitalism, an economist, but he also thought the government should play a big role in helping stabilize the economy, is a guy named John Maynard Keynes, and he thought the economy goes down, you should invest more in it and into the economy, kind of like we do anyway. And even a lot of Republicans that say I don't like John Maynard Keynes, they will also do that too and increase the deficit and not always balance the budget if they feel the economy goes up and down. They want to boost it. And with the pandemic this year, there's been a lot of bipartisan support by Republicans and Democrats to go into debt. We went into a lot of debt this year for our country so that we can help struggling businesses and unemployed and other expenses with the what's going on. And that's it. I just literally went over every single question on the test and the answers and everything in a roundabout way. So it's all here. You got your notes you can use. I just went over, explained a bunch of things. Hopefully that helps. And hopefully you'll ace the test. It's worth 100 points. I'm not calling that final exam. I'm just calling that final test. So it's going to be treated just like as if you took the test anyway. Okay. And then that's it. Get in all your other work. Be in touch with me. If it's old work from before about mid-December, send me an email or a text and say, Mr. Rio, I turned in these things from, I'll accept it. We're in a pandemic. I'll accept some of the late stuff. It's better get it in than not. So go for your best grade, do your best. Great having all of you in class, though I wish I would have got to meet you, but hopefully I'll meet many or all of you in the future here sometime at Harper Creek. Maybe I'll see you in some of my other classes, digital video production, web design, computer literacy. Maybe I'll see you again. So that is it. Let me undo this here. I should have undid that first. But thank you for joining us here. Thank you, Jocelyn there. I gotta go. Okay, yeah, she had to leave. Okay. And are we doing a note slideshow for this test or no? We already did that. Chapter 12 and 13 notes and slides were like from, before Christmas. That was the week before. So we already did that a few weeks ago. So you should have that. If you don't have that, you got that to do. But that was we did that. Matter of fact, I didn't give you much work that week, so you can just do that. So in case you missed that, that was Jocelyn who departed us asked me about that. If you got any other questions, unmute yourself or put it in the chat. If not, that's it. Take care. Have a great day. Yep. Take
Bye,
care,
Mr.
Brooklyn. Thank you. Take care, Peyton. Take care, Masson. Stop and say hi when you're here sometime at the high school someday.
See you on Monday.
Yep. Take care.